Welcome home. We are WNST. Tassel, Baltimore. Baltimore Positive. We are positively taking the Maryland Crab Cake Tour back out on the road. We're going to be on the road throughout November into December. I'm wearing my Coco shirt. We're going to be at Coco's. I got the date here, December the 4th. So that's the day that Mike Brasigliano will come out and they'll spike my eggnog, get my eggnog off to the right start in early December. Our friends also at Jiffy Lube Multicare taking us out with the Maryland Lottery on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour. And the Oyster Tour is in progress. All of that brought to you by our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions. 1-800 Clean Water. They keep my water clean. If you have well water, if you have any plumbing needs, our friends at Liberty Pure Solutions, they solve those problems. And of course, Curio Wellness and Far and Dotter. When my back's been a little creaky from being up watching the Yankees lose the World Series, I have some Move product for my back to makes me feel nice. Stop by Far and Dotter, see what they can do for you there in their big golf bag and arsenal of wellness products. Luke Jones, you and I spent the early part of the week talking trade deadline, trade deadline. I don't think we said trade deadline, and Eric DeCosta was out dealing for a position on the team that he is referred to as strength, and the signing of Bateman in the offseason, all of that. How are you? How's your week? Here come the Broncos, and don't look now, but the Bengals are right around the corner, right?
Yeah, lots going on the field, off the field. Still not much clarity on the Marcus Williams thing, but lo and behold, as we're now under a week from the trade deadline, the Ravens go out there and make a move for a name player, give up very little in the process, but as I noted on social media, very much know that times are a-changing when the Ravens go out and get a star wide receiver, and yet, I think much of the reaction you saw for it, and we'll get into it, and I think this is a good move. How can you dislike it? They gave up nothing basically to get Deontay Johnson, but many fans, many reporters, many observers asking, what about the defense? And they're not wrong in asking about that. So just kind of speaks that this is definitely a different Ravens team. This is not your father's Ravens or your older brother's Ravens. Maybe that'd be the best way to put it. But you bring in Deontay Johnson for a swap of a fifth round pick and a sixth round pick. I mean, that's nothing. I mean, you're
That's kind
talking
of
about
shocking value wise, right? Like, and apparently there were two other teams in on the deal. What the hell were they offering?
I first of all, that part of it, I'm really skeptical because I mean, what were they asking for Deontay Johnson and a pick and giving nothing in return? I mean, you can't get much lower than what this offer was. I mean, this is the Ravens taking a fifth round pick in next year's draft and saying, okay, we'll move back roughly 20 spots. I mean, that's probably what this is going to equate to, and you get a rental of a former Pro Bowl wide receiver. Now, Deontay Johnson's not the best in football or top five, but he's a quality player. And you can sit here and say this wasn't their biggest need, and it wasn't. But what happens if something happens to Zay Flowers, right? What happens if something happens to Rashad Bateman? This is very clearly an upgrade over Nelson Aguilar. I'm not sitting here and saying that this pushes them over this gets them over the hump to get to the Super Bowl. But depending on the range of scenarios here, I think it's tough to look at this with very much downside at all, right? I don't really see much there. I'm not convinced that Deontay Johnson's going to be a massive part of what they do because we've talked about the difficulty and the number of mouths they already had to feed with the football. But certainly when you're talking in terms of depth, when you're talking in terms of someone who can run routes, he might be able to lend a hand in the return game. That's something that he's been an all-pro selection before, much earlier in his career. But you add him to the picture, it just gives you another option. It gives you perhaps a little more diversification if you want to run three wide sets. They haven't done a whole lot of 11 personnel. And as I said, at the very least, this is pretty distinct upgrade from Nelson Aguilar. So,
They got four tight ends already they want to get on the field, right?
oh, sure, exactly. And
Including one of them under center in a key spot
right.
3 days ago.
And this is where, again, I would exercise a little bit of caution and expectations, understanding because of that, because they already have so many mouths to feed offensively, and there's only one football to go around. We were talking about this. I mean, Mark Andrews was a ghost in this offense in September, right? And that's someone who's a multi-time Pro Bowl tight end.
They're just going to score 50 every week, Luke. That's all. That's just going to score
Oh,
50.
right. And maybe that's what, and if you're Eric DeCosta and you look at this and say, look, we're going to continue to look for pass rushers. We're going to continue to look at the safety position. But we also can't guarantee that a deal's going to manifest itself, right? Or that the guys available are going to be guys that dramatically move the needle compared to what we have. So
Well,
when you
he and
look
I
at a
both
deal,
thought Derrick Henry was a good idea last year, and he couldn't get it done, right? So to think that you're going to get a Zadarius Smith or you're going to get a clown, you're going to get a pass rusher this
just don't
week,
know.
you don't
You don't
know. You don't know.
know.
But they
Right.
have
I
the
mean, you
arsenal to
could.
be able to do it. I mean,
Oh,
somebody else is giving a
absolutely.
fourth, you can give a third. You know what I mean? You can
Right.
play that game.
Well, and that's what you have to look at. That's where you have to look at this and say, how much do we value that player at the asking price or to up the asking price because three other teams are vying for that guy?
Or
That's
how
part of
glaring
this.
is the need? How
Yeah,
glaring is the need to
sure.
say, if we get that player, here's the 30 to 40 snaps they're going to play, and these are the snaps and the position we want Simpson off the field. We want somebody off. We want something to happen here that we can affect change because that's the way they look at it out there. They're pretty sophisticated in how they go at this, right? And if they're going to go at this and say, what can that player do for me in week 10? What can he be doing in week 17, 18, 19, 20, right? That's where this would be for them. I don't think that they have Yannick Ngakoue, as you pointed out, right? Like if they're looking to get a guy off the street, they've already done that.
Yeah, and therein lies the question, whoever might be available, how much better is that individual than Yannick Ngakoue? And when you go down the list of, I mean, David Ajabo was a healthy scratch. There's been so much going on this week that question hasn't
Well,
even been
there is, yeah. I
broached.
mean,
But
maybe that bleeds into this a little bit about how they feel about their own personnel because
sure,
it's really clear this Marcus Williams thing is one of the biggest mistakes in the history of the organization if they're going to bench him and Harbaugh's going to do no speaky and Harbaugh's going to play the power game like he did with me and thinking I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and never bring anything up of disrespect one way or another. And the player always has the power in this position because the player's making more money than the coach. In this
oh,
case,
and
there aren't many of those, but this in this case, and he's a guy, Marcus Williams, that other than you and I uttering his salary a little bit and this and that, like most fans don't know he was ever here, he was ever part, like literally, because he hasn't been an impact player at all.
um, he was really good to start out his first year, but he got hurt. And last year he played through some injuries. He was much better the first 2 years of this deal. Like I wouldn't put this up with the absolute worst deals in free agent deals in franchise history over the first 2 years. Now, what it's become in year three, and you know, I my gut tells me we're going to see him back on the field Sunday because Eddie Jackson's no better, right? I mean, you can kind of look at this thing and say, okay, it's not as though you drafted a guy in the first round that is a market upgrade over him. So I think you're going to see them still trying to figure this out. Maybe they mix and match. Maybe they sub guys in and out. And I still wonder if that's part of the origin of what happened. Maybe they told him he was going to be a no longer a 100% snap kind of guy, and maybe he reacted to that in a not so favorable way to be benched entirely. I don't know.
All we
Again,
have are the
when
maybes, right? All we know is he
sure,
didn't play and nobody's talking about it. And
uh,
that's
and
that's
and
unusual in the Purple Castle, where everything's just Chad Steele keeps everything nice and tidy and neat and everybody's got an answer for everything. This is it feels a little ugly in a week when they lost to the Browns and they have two football games this week and it's a position of glaring need to your point. It's a position that's
yeah,
cost them.
yeah, it's cost them a lot. But I mean, I approached Marcus Williams in the locker room on Wednesday. He declined to talk. So you hear John Harbaugh's side of it. Truths, half truths, darn lies, whatever, however you want to classify it, or just not being very clear about it as you're continuing to praise a player, but you're not playing them in a game. You go to the player to see what he has to say, and he didn't want to talk. So we're going off of a very incomplete picture, but the trouble still lies with the fact that their pass defense needs to get better. Absolutely needs to
It
get
wasn't
better.
Marcus Williams' fault on Sunday that they lost. He didn't play.
He didn't play,
So for you to
right?
go to him, I mean, right? I mean,
Well,
I'm not taking his side, Harbaugh's side, whatever. I've seen the tape. But whatever it is, it's not kumbaya. And
sure.
this is why John makes the big bucks is to smooth these things out and make sure that who was the guy on the Super Bowl team that got in the fight with Flacco? I always forget his name. He always pops off on social media. The guy that would hit everybody late, that everybody
Oh, Bernard Pollard?
yeah. This
He,
turns into a
he got in
Bernard
a fight
Pollard.
with he didn't get in a fight with
Well,
Flacco.
they got into war words. It was well
Oh,
reported by
okay.
me. No, no,
Okay.
no. Well, Parler fought with Harbaugh the whole time and had no
Right,
problem
right, right.
talking
Yeah,
about that
no,
the last
I didn't
10
know.
years.
I didn't know what you were talking about
No, no,
specifically
no.
with
I'm just
that, but
saying,
yeah,
like this might be one of those things when it's 2 years from now, we'll
yeah.
figure out what happened in week 8. But this is a key player, right? I mean, it's not like we're talking about the edge of the roster or even like where they were with the wide receiver last year, who was just a spare piece, right? I
Yeah.
mean, this was a contract guy that was brought in to be a part of this, and now there's a rift of some kind. I mean, I'm not saying that as a reporter. I'm saying that as a fan, just
Sure.
watching it and saying there's something amiss out there. There's something awry. Harbaugh's going to have to exhibit some leadership here. And to your point, defense needs to get better.
Well, and it's not, and to the point that you just made, it's clearly not just Marcus Williams because he was benched on Sunday and they let Jameis Winston throw 3 touchdowns in the second half. So look, I noted this at BaltimorePositive.com. This isn't just on one player. This isn't just on one coach. I think this is a collective problem. And it's not just Marcus Williams. I mean, Roquan Smith's not playing like $100 million off-ball linebacker this year. He's not. He's been a problem in coverage. Now we can talk about whether that's him. We can talk about whether schemes putting him in the best positions to maximize his talents. We can talk about maybe him missing Patrick Queen, and not to bash Trenton Simpson. He's a first-year starter, and I still think he's going to be a good player. And he's actually looked a little bit better in coverage. So maybe that's part of the solution, at least in the interim. But the point is, Marcus Williams, value concern. Roquan Smith, this year, at the very least, through the first 8 games, has not played like the highest paid inside linebacker in the NFL should play. And even, look at someone like Nnamdi Madubuike up front. Hasn't been bad, but has he been as great as he was last year? No. And you
He was a
paid him a
game
lot of
wrecker
money.
last year. You paid him to be a
Right.
game wrecker, right?
He's had, I mean, he's had too many penalties. I mean, the sack total, that's something that can be, especially over 7 or 8 games, that doesn't necessarily always give you the best picture of how a player is playing. But when you're registering 15-yard penalties almost weekly, it feels like that, and you're not racking up the sacks in the process, then that's a problem. So, and again, it's not just on those guys either. And we can point to Zach Orr. We can point to the assistant coaches they lost, right? I mean, we talked about this throughout the offseason. This isn't just the same exact defense as last year, and you roll it out. You had quite a bit of attrition player wise and coaching wise, but Nestor, through 8 games, the Ravens have allowed one fewer touchdown than they did all last year. I mean, think about that touchdown passes I'm talking. I mean, that's alarming, right? I mean that is absolute. That last year they basically averaged one touchdown pass allowed per game. This year they're basically averaging two. That's notable. I mean, 7 points right there without even talking about anything else. I mean, that's very notable. So it's jarring, and I think part of the frustration here is I still don't think they can completely pinpoint it. And that's why I said it's not all on Marcus Williams. It's not all on Zach Orr. It's not all on the other paid defensive players I talked about. We talked about this after Sunday's game, and we've talked about this on other occasions. If this secondary could just catch the football a little bit better, their pass defense would, perception wise at least, look a lot better. I mean, Kyle Hamilton catches that pass on Sunday, they win, right? And I don't want to be dismissive of all their other issues, but again, you kind of go across the board and you can look at 4, 5, 6 different variables that are impacting that defense right now. So that's why, as much as I give a thumbs up to the Deontay Johnson trade, and shouldn't be something that hinders their ability to add a defensive piece between now and the trade deadline, especially with Carolina paying down a lot of Deontay Johnson's remaining contract. So it's not a major financial commitment either, let alone talking about the draft pick compensation. Compensation I almost use in air quotes because of how little it actually is, but they've got to figure this out. I mean, I still will say, even if Marcus Williams hasn't played up to his contract, and obviously he hasn't, especially this year. First 2 years, it was the health concerns and availability concerns. But I would still say this defense on the back end still is way too talented to be as bad as it has been against the pass. And I say that fully acknowledging that, yeah, the pass rush needs, yeah, in my opinion, needs another dude. I mean, I think you have to try everything you possibly can to go get another dude. And that doesn't mean Max Crosby's even going to be available, let alone you come up with the offer that's going to satisfy Las Vegas to part with a talent like that.
Can we
But
talk cap a little bit? Because well, I just want to interject into that and say some of the players they're talking about bringing in or out, money's a part of that. Buda Baker. I mean, there's a bunch of guys that are on bad teams or thought to be on bad teams that can be moving around in one way on the defense. Where are they in relation to that? Because Williams is a big number. I've spent the whole week this week talking about the cap number of Russell Wilson in Denver, and last week the potential cap hit for there's nothing like that going on in this organization as we see it. I mean, especially with the restructure, Ronnie Stanley and some other things that happen, but also Kyle Hamilton's going to be coming online. Linderbaum's going to get a big contract when his time comes. So they have some players that are going to get paid, as we would say, right? And other players that have been paid along the way. What would you think? Is there anything they can't or can or cannot do? Clearly, they can deal a second round pick and get a player, right? But then there's the money part of taking people on.
yeah, I mean, right now, and I'm pulled up overthecap.com, which is a pretty reliable source in terms of, where they are cap wise. It has them at $3.7 million. Look, they can create more cap space. I mean, they have the deals. When you have a quarterback on a, 50 plus $1 million per year, you can do things with that, right? And you're not going to cut Lamar Jackson next year or the year after that. So you know that that's something you can do. I mean, they have a few other deals they could do that with. Now, Marcus Williams, under normal circumstances, if he were playing at the level that he's being compensated, he would be a guy where you probably would restructure his deal. You don't want to touch that deal, right? In the same way they didn't want to touch Ronnie Stanley's deal, say last year or the year before, because of where he was health wise and performance wise. So there are things they can do to create space. There are always, I don't want to say always, there are usually always ways that you can increase cap space if you want to. But as we know, there's always an opportunity cost there. There's always needing to pay the piper down the road in that regard.
And also
The
with
New
dead money, the Ravens aren't living with a lot of dead money, right? I mean, I'm
Yeah,
trying to
I
think
mean
if there's any dead money. You'll come up with a name or two, but there's something, right? There's a guy or two that I don't even know
yeah,
who they would be. Who have they cut that was a failure that they had to eat money on? I don't
I'm
the
trying to think
the
like
Zeitlers and the Moses and the guys that were sort of at that point in their careers are all gone.
yeah, I mean there's always some dead money, right? But there's not a smoking gun of, oh my gosh, they had to eat $20 million in cap space
With
for
Russell
for the for
Wilson, it
this
was
season.
50 and 30.
Yeah, yeah. So there's nothing. But so the point is, and look, you mentioned Zadarius Smith as an option, and whether Cleveland would be willing to trade him in the division or not, it feels like the Browns would be one of the teams that would be foolish to do that, even if the Ravens presented the best offer, because some teams still have that line of thinking. But go look at his salary for this year. He's not making any money in terms of base salary, so that wouldn't be a problem for someone like him. But for other players where there's a lot of money still
So if
owed,
the
or
Browns are getting a fifth round pick for him or a fourth, you couldn't give him a fourth or a third. I mean, it would seem to me
I'd
if
I'd give him a fourth. I wouldn't even think twice about it. My question would be,
somebody else going to give him a third then. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
well,
Like if it's the
or
Browns, what do they care? If they play us one more time and Zadarius Smith's a
I hear
rental
you.
player. Yeah, I
I
mean
hear
that
you, but
that
but you
seems
also,
really silly.
well, and I'm obviously I'm putting some words in their mouth because they haven't come out and said that, but it's the Browns, right? And but we've talked about this. We've seen this in other sports too, where teams won't trade within the division just because, not because it's not the best deal, but oh, well, we can't trade with them. Why? Why? If they're offering you the best pick or they're offering you the best package of prospects in baseball, for example, why wouldn't you trade with someone in the
Patrick
division?
Queen go play for the Steelers and
Never,
Geno Stone
yeah.
go play for the Bengals. That's what they do.
I mean, the players do that, but if you're the team, look, if you're the Ravens, hypothetically in some year and you're out of it, and the Steelers come calling or the Bengals come calling and they give you the best offer for someone that's not in your plans, why wouldn't you trade them? I mean, that just sounds like kind of a old school dumb way of thinking, right? So, but again, bringing it back to your question, there are things they can do to create some cap space. I'm not saying that's the ideal way you want to do it. I'm not saying that that's their first choice, their first preference, but there are almost always means to create some more cap space. But you pointing it out is a very cogent point in talking about the fact that you're going to want to get a Kyle Hamilton deal done as soon as you possibly can, right? After year three is when draft picks, former draft picks become eligible for contract extensions. He's going to be there. Tyler Linderbaum, same way. He's going to be one of the highest paid centers in football, if not the highest. Just
So this is
knowing,
the wild thing. You and I talk about this on the back end of the World Series. In baseball, it's a completely different paradigm in
sure,
regard to signing players. Whereas giving Kyle Hamilton money, you've got cap space, you're a rich franchise, everybody's a rich
yeah,
franchise, the whole league's flush. Then it's just about the fight with him, like the fight with Lamar about am I a $48 million quarterback or a 52 and how much
sure.
is guaranteed? I mean, they'll get Hamilton done. That's the difference. You have the confidence. I have the confidence Hamilton, Kyle Hamilton's not going anywhere. They'll pay him. Baseball fan, different. That's
Sure.
where we get our minds into this. And also, dead
Although,
money and
although let me,
cap money and what they can and can't do. I just want to get on our airwaves here on Halloween before the Denver thing, before the trade deadline. The Ravens can do whatever they want. If they want to offer a two and a player for Max Crosby, right, and pick up his 25, 30 million. I don't know what's he going to be, right? He's that kind of player, right? Like they're going to have to getting that kind of player is different than Zadarius Smith from a cap standpoint. And that's where I'm trying to get my arms around Max Crosby and star players. And if they had brought Derrick Henry in last year, I'm assuming the reason the Derrick Henry thing didn't happen was compensation, not salary. Although
yeah.
you were always of the mindset of that's too much money to, or teams
Well,
don't pay. Not you. I don't want to get personal with you, but the running backs aren't. You don't want that cap number on your running back. The Ravens haven't had any problem with it this year. Everybody's happy with it, even at 5-3. But the money part of these deals, the NBA, it's the biggest part, right? You're an NBA fan. I mean, when you start dealing NBA players, cap space and player space and all that's a big part of it. That won't play into that this week, correct?
I mean, I wouldn't think so. And look, you mentioned the baseball example. Keep in mind the absolute best players in football are who? The quarterbacks, right? You've got the franchise tag too. I mean, and it really is a different dynamic. I mean, there's no mechanism in baseball to keep the absolute best of the best on your roster in the same way, other than a qualifying offer, which gets you a pick. So,
I appreciate
but
you saying that
look,
because there's nothing Mr. Rubenstein can do if Gunnar Henderson's dreams to play for the Braves. Like literally. You know what I
but
mean? Like literally.
yes, true. I would also say all of these teams, even the small market teams, have more means to sign players than they give off.
They can
Also, I
sign
would
their
also say
star if they
that
wish to.
they could, right,
Right.
correct. Not everyone can have a $300 million payroll. Let's be clear
But
on that.
everybody can have a
But
$40 million player. Right.
everyone could, right, no question about it. So I don't want to, especially for Pittsburgh and
Oh,
some of
come
these
on, man.
markets.
33
I
years.
mean,
Don't think that I'm playing
oh yeah,
Hawks and Doves
exactly,
with these Cree
exactly,
billionaires about whether
right.
they can afford,
But
especially Mr. Big Pants Rubenstein and Eric Getty. They can buy whatever they want in any way they want. They bought the team. So,
sure,
like,
sure.
but in baseball, that expectation is different than where we are this week, where nuts are in a crunch, 5-3, quarterback's hurt, by the way. We're 30 minutes in. We haven't even talked about the quarterback being hurt. We'll do that. And he did run into some linebackers last week, but leaping, bounding like Superman and all that. But to the trade thing, I don't want to get all like lathered up thinking Max Crosby's coming here and you saying, dude, they're already paying $20 million players everywhere. They have one of those. His name's Marcus Williams. They got to get him on the field.
Well, and there's also the question of you're talking about a franchise kind of player there. Are the Raiders going to just trade him, right? Or is the cost, is the asking price so over the moon that it's not practical in terms of the compensation and what you have to pay?
Well, a number one for the Ravens sounds like in the 20s, right? Right.
Sure.
So if you're
I
giving
mean,
a one up, you're thinking we're giving the 23rd, 25th pick. Would we want Max Crosby for that?
and I would say if I'm the Raiders, that doesn't sound all that appealing to me.
Correct.
I mean, seriously, like, so again, we're just using him as an example. I don't think he's going to get traded. I don't think the Raiders want to trade him. So that's where you do look at someone like a Zadarius Smith and you see that his base salary is really low because I haven't looked at his contract, intimately or closely, but I would assume there's been money moved around because the Browns have had to do that because they have a guaranteed contract for their franchise quarterback who's hurt and stinks anyway. So those are the kind of players, generally speaking, that are movable, easily movable at the trade deadline, and a player that could still help them. So we'll see how it plays out. But a big part of this, and I alluded to this a little bit with Deontay Johnson, but I also think and we talked about this a lot with the trade deadline in baseball. I think you also have to be realistic about what a player is going to bring you when he's traded in the middle of a season, swimming upstream, and certain positions that's much easier to deal with than others, right? A running back, for example, and keep in mind, Tennessee, it sounds like ownership nixed that as much as anything at the time. But for Tennessee,
They just
not
weren't
wanting to,
going to trade a Hall of Fame
they
player
didn't
in
want to
the
trade Derrick
season.
Henry, and they just let him walk. Then,
Yeah.
I mean, whatever. But I think, you look at some of these, and that's where I like the Deontay Johnson deal, but I'm not sitting here saying that that's going to move the needle dramatically unless, heaven forbid, something happens to Zay Flowers or something happens to Rashad Bateman or something happens to one of your tight ends and you're not leaning on your tight ends in the passing game quite as much. So but because you are talking about having to learn a new offense and building rapport with your new teammates. Certain positions I think you can plug in and that's fine and that's not an issue. Other positions I think it can be a little more of a challenge. That's where I look at this thing throwing aside the Devontae Adams and the Jets because they stink. Devontae Adams doesn't stink, but the Jets stink and they're not going anywhere. But that's where I look at this and say, okay, how quickly does Amari Cooper get acclimated with the Bills? I mean, is he going to be peak Amari Cooper by the end of the year, or is that going to be a little more of a middling move? Same with DeAndre Hopkins going to the Chiefs. So that's where I look at Deontay Johnson in the same light. And also keep in mind, he's in a contract year. And I'm guessing from a business standpoint, moving to the Ravens with their diverse, very productive, very deep offense in terms of all the different things they do, probably not going to get the normal target share that he's used to getting. So how is he going to deal with that? He might be totally fine and he might say, "Hey, I want to win. That's fine, no problem." Or we also know that he was a guy that kind of wore out his welcome in Pittsburgh at the end, and that's why he was playing for the Carolina Panthers. I like the deal. Let's be clear. How could you not? They didn't give up anything of any consequence whatsoever. But these in-season deals, as much as you love to think of them in terms of, oh, that's going to get us over the hump, a lot of times it doesn't work out that way. And we've talked about that with baseball too, with trade deadline moves and how many times you think a deal is going to be the final
Hey,
piece
Jack
for a team.
Flaherty has a ring and Mike Messina does not. Let's
He
point
does
that
not.
out. Correct?
Uh,
And Aaron
although
Judge
Jack,
does not.
although Jack Flaherty had nothing to do with them winning in Game 6 or Game 5. So, but again, you just don't know, and that's where if you're Eric DeCosta or any of the top general managers around the league, general managers for contenders, you're looking at this and saying, how do I juggle what we can give up now for a player? What can his impact be? And what impact might that have on our salary cap, not just this year, but next year, year after that, our draft picks? I mean, the Ravens have quite an assortment of picks they're going to be owed coming next year because of all the free agents they lost. They're going to, they're slated to have the 4 comp picks, which is the max. So that's where you look at this and say, yeah, of course you'll do a pick swap, or of course you would trade a 4th round pick for Zadarius Smith, right? I mean, I wouldn't even think twice about that. I'd take a long look at giving up a 3rd for him. I don't know if I'd go, I wouldn't give up a 2nd round pick for him because I don't think Zadarius Smith is that kind of player
He
necessarily.
wasn't that when
But
they drafted him.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and again, you can't lose your mind. You still want to be disciplined in how you value players, but you also understand that if you're a team that, like the Ravens right now, clearly has a Super Bowl caliber offense, they already did even before adding Deontay Johnson to the mix. So that side of the ball, you feel great about. I mean, you just need to keep everyone healthy. It's that simple. Even the O line, right? You feel that it's played well enough that that's not going to be the thing that hinders you from potentially getting to a Super Bowl. But the pass defense, that's a different story right now, especially knowing that you're going to face good offenses in the playoffs. So, is there a safety move to be made? Is there a pass rush move to be made? And we also need to, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this. The interior defensive line picture is different now. Michael Pierce is on IR. He's not expected to be out for the year, but he's out at least the next month. Travis Jones still dealing with that ankle. Brent Urban, concussion. So, might they even look at a defensive tackle? I don't know. So I think it's tough to project multiple trades still down the pike, but I think they're going to make at least another move. I think they need to.
Well,
I think
especially
they
the
need,
Arsenal draft picks they have coming in the comp
yeah.
plan, right?
And that's the thing. Again, I mean, you can, and even like I just said, I mean, Carolina paid down a large chunk of what Deontay Johnson's owed the rest of the year, and that was even with what little of an upgrade they're making in that pick swap. So teams are always there are always things you can do either way, whether you're the team that's selling or the team that's buying to make it work. So for me, it's really a matter of trying to identify who you think's going to move the needle, right? And even when you look at players, sometimes you can look at the sack numbers and say, "Oh, wow, well, that guy has X number of sacks," but then you look at the pressure rate and you say, "Oh, he's not really getting to the quarterback consistently. It's maybe he was set up well, or maybe the stars just aligned on a couple plays here or there. I mean, we also know that. So, and the Ravens are an analytically minded team that are going to look at that. They're going to look at pressure rate, not just the guy's, his sack total. So we're going to see. But I'll say this, and I think you would wholeheartedly agree. Most of the improvement there is going to have to come from within, right? I mean, you're not going to bring in five new players and try
I'm
to
figuring out where
reboot
one
this
is going to
thing.
come from,
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly.
That's all.
I think you're looking for one piece. Yeah, I think you're hopeful that, whether it's a safety, whether it's an edge rusher, maybe it's a defensive tackle that can give you pass rush juice. I mean, there are different ways to do this, but what they've been doing pass rush wise, married to coverage on the back end, has not been nearly good enough. I mean, that's the captain obvious statement at this point, but there's only so much you can do in terms of even who's going to be available out there that's really going to move the needle for you. So a lot of it's going to come down to, it's gut check time. And for the coaches, it's you got to figure this out. If all this pre-snap disguise and deception is causing guys to not get lined up correctly and guys are confused and they're not understanding, then you need to look at somewhere in that process, whether it's what's going on during the week in the classrooms and on the practice field, or what's happening on Sunday in terms of your communication. Because I mean, we saw it, that first Cedric Tillman touchdown where you go back and watch the replay. I mean, Adafe always running parallel to the line of scrimmage, trying to get lined up properly. And I'm not picking on him. It was like three or four guys like that, where it's just like, what's going on here? Like that shouldn't be happening in week 8. I mean, as Kyle Hamilton, he was asked about it on Wednesday. He said that shouldn't happen in week 1. I mean, there's too much of that, and we're just again, a lot of variables changed, right? It wasn't
Well,
just
good quarterbacks will make you pay for all of that. And they
no
got
question.
Burrow on Thursday night, and they have a kid
Yeah,
here this week.
he's playing
Um,
better.
Luke,
Bo
well, let's
Nix,
take a break. We're going to talk some Lamar. We're going to talk about the game. We're going to talk about Denver. A lot of Denver words and work here this week. Brandon Stokely joined me. He does sports radio out in Denver. He had a lot to say. My old pal Mike Kliss joined us from Denver. He just wrote a book on John Elway, so we had some John Elway conversations as well. And also Sean Drotar, who did a lot on Dion. He's the press box announcer for the Colorado Buffaloes, but longtime Mile High sports guy and a veteran here. All of them with really interesting observations about the Broncos and about that franchise and where it is as they come in 5-3 and tickled. And the Ravens are 5-3 and scuffling right now. Baltimore Luke is the way to find Luke. He is Luke at WNST.net. You can find me out on the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. I'll have the Ravens scratch offs to give away. Thought this was a lucky batch. Nobody came up to me at Mama's last week and told me they won. I know somebody won. I gave out too many tickets for somebody not to win. Mama's on the half shell last week. Howard Scher was there. We did some hockey and a tribute to Jeff Amder. And also, I heard from Ray Bachman this week for Halloween. And he's doing okay. He's hanging in. So everybody loves Ray. There's an Oyster Tour portion at day 6 out on the front of Baltimore Positive where you can do something nice for Ray Bachman if you wish. He's battling cancer down in Pasadena. And I'll continue to check in with him. Our Oyster Tour is brought to you by our friends at Curio Wellness and Far and Dotter, as well as Liberty Pure Solutions, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER, the way to get the best plumbers around, and certainly that clean water that I enjoy in the filtration system, because well water, bleh, no good. It's like the Yankees defense on Wednesday night. Bleh, no good. By the way, Yankees lost the World Series. Yankees lost the World Series. I just want to say that a whole lot. Go Dodgers. Go Dodgers on behalf of Fernando. I am Nestor. He's Luke. We got plenty of football ahead. We're WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore Positive.